early childhood education needs to be introducing sign language as early as possible.
Some students, hearing students, they told me they can talk about the secret using the sign language.
That's why this national law is so wonderful, because it's a big first step to change attitudes, not only of the administrators in the public schools, but of the hearing children that are learning the sign.
Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Divya Gopalan. Now, if I asked you what the pandemic has changed in the world around you, you would probably name travel or working from home. You might find it surprising then that one of the lesser-known effects of those 2 years over here was that it brought more public awareness to Taiwan's sign language. How? Well, a sign language interpreter was present at all the daily government press conferences on the situation, which were closely watched across the country. While that's raised some interest, the question is now, what does Taiwan need to do to make its own sign language more visible in society? To give us a greater understanding of this topic, we welcome Dr. Jean Andrews, a professor in the Department of Deaf Studies and Deaf Education at Lamar University from Texas in the United States. And joining us here in Taipei is Ku Fang-huai, a sign language teacher and founder of the Signing Village Workshop. Thank you both so much for being part of the program today to talk about a very, very important topic. Jean, I'm going to start with you here. I think what a lot of people don't know is that sign languages vary from within communities and geographically. Can you give us a sense of the diversity of sign languages?
Yes. In fact, what you're bringing up is a myth that all sign languages are universal and everybody signs the same. And nothing could be further from the truth. Each country has one or even more than one sign language or sign language dialect that emerged from deaf people using it themselves, being centralized into schools, and it's spreading. So, for example, Taiwan has TSL, Taiwanese Sign Language, which is the basic sign language, but in small areas of Taiwan, in rural areas, there might be some dialectical difference. And Feng-huai might be able to elaborate on that because he is a coda and comes from a deaf family.
Right, Feng-huai, yes. I think that's your cue there.
Yes. Well, I mean, Taiwan Sign Language can be traced to the Japanese who established the public education for deaf children by importing their Japanese sign language to teaching method. Well, the linguistic research revealed that TSL shares more than 60% of its lexicon with the JSL, and it's similar syntactic structures with the JSL. So, I mean, so basically the Taiwan Sign Language can be part of the family of the JSL, the Japanese Sign Language. So we can communicate with Japanese deaf peoples with the Taiwan Sign Language.
Jean, American Sign Language is now the third most commonly taught language at American colleges and universities, and is among the most used languages in the United States. Now, if you could pinpoint how it managed to make its way as part of the mainstream, perhaps not enough, but still managed to do that, what would that be? Well,
that's an interesting point. ASL, American Sign Language, has been part of deaf education since the early 19th century. But it has been oppressed and repressed because the oral movement took over. But recently, I think more than 45 states have passed laws saying ASL can be taken as a foreign language or a second language in high schools and colleges. And what this has resulted in this boom, ASL in high school and university students are running to sign up for classes, and they're growing. And a lot of it has to do with, as you noticed when you were signing in the beginning of the show, is that it uses facial expression and body language. Young people love that. They love to be able to communicate using their whole bodies, like in dancing or in gestures. So it really has taken off in the United States in that kind of sector. And it also has to do with the advocacy of the deaf community. We have a very powerful National Association of the Deaf, which is a by and for deaf people that's been established since the late 1800s. And that has really pushed ASL. And we have a very strong law, the American with Disabilities Act, that puts teeth into that, providing linguistic rights for deaf people to get interpreters, ASL interpreters in hospitals or in prisons, in courtroom and all of that. So that really has pushed the impetus for ASL.
Right. So Fang-huai, Jean makes so many points and so many kind of different, as you say, elements that have come together to help ASL into mainstream communication. In Taiwan, last year, sign language is introduced in the national curriculum. How much has that helped bring awareness or bring the importance of sign language to the wider public?
Well, I think this is good because we have we call the National Language Act. It passed in 2019, and this is good. And because most of the people, they don't know about any sign language. They just think sign language is just the gestures or the movement. And the sign language is not the formal language. So right now, sign language is introduced through the first grade to the high school. So the students, they will learn the sign language and they will learn the sign language. And so if they just meet the deaf people, they will know how to communicate with the deaf people. And they also know the deaf culture because the deaf culture is totally different than the hearing culture. So there's so many things in the school and teaching the hearing students. So hearing students will help the deaf community, and they will just help each other to get know each other.
There's so much that both of you have brought up that I want to pick up on. But before we do that, I want to go to this Connected report. Our team took a look at the difference getting an education in sign language makes to deaf children.
My name is Xie Yunting. I am 11 years old.
I am Ma Ying. I'm 38 years old. I work in the food industry. In my family, I'm the only one who can't hear. Everyone else can hear fine. I was always in regular schools. When I was in high school, I transferred to the Taipei School for the Hearing Impaired. I didn't understand what teacher was teaching. I read teacher's lips when the teacher was talking. I really tried to read the teacher's lips. I'm a slow learner.
Yunting attends Shuanglin Elementary School, one of 6 elementary schools with more resources for hearing-impaired education in Taipei. The school has specially trained teachers who provide individual guidance to children with special needs during dedicated classes.
In regular elementary schools, the teaching staff is essential because students primarily use sign language. If a school does not have sign language teachers, it can be challenging for the children. Fortunately, I have expertise, and for subjects like Mandarin, math, and English, I can conduct separate classes.
Deaf teacher Chen Zhirong uses sign language instructions, visual aids, and exercises to help Yunting understand the lessons. However, not every regular elementary school can provide full sign language education or have sign language interpreters available for support. Yunting has, at times, felt frustrated because she wasn't able to quickly understand what the teachers were saying.
Back when I was at Wuchang Elementary School, we didn't have classes with resources like this. we didn't have teacher Zhirong, and there was no sign language help. I used to wonder every day why I had to go to school and why nobody could provide me with more translation. I worried a lot and felt anxious. But since I came here in the 3rd grade, I've been learning more and more. And I no longer need to keep asking why. I've become brave and confident.
With the help of the school and teachers, Yunting can now study with more confidence and interact with her classmates more comfortably. Aying, on the other hand, only started learning sign language in high school. Now she uses her time before work to practice teaching it to others. She recently became a qualified Taiwan Sign Language support instructor. She hopes to teach sign language in schools and promotes awareness of sign language and deaf culture.
I think sign language has opened up a new world for me, allowing me to learn more. I believe that without sign language, I wouldn't have met you all. And I wouldn't have known my classmates and teachers at the school for the hearing impaired. If I hadn't learned sign language, I might have become depressed, for sure.
Well, for a full version of this video, please visit the TaiwanPlus website and the TaiwanPlus News YouTube channel. Right, so I think that was a pretty good depiction of what 2 generations have gone through with learning sign language and the perceptions of sign language. Now, I want to start, Feng-huai, with this figure here. 125,000 deaf people are in Taiwan, with only about 30,000 knowing sign language. Why do you think it's this proportion?
Well, I mean, it's a long story, actually. In the 1980s, deaf education in Taiwan became more influenced by the mainstream setting placement as the oral philosophy and the trending Chinese methodologies, such as SIMCOM, we call the simultaneous communication. Well, so especially the parents, they expect spoken language to be taught rather than the TSL, with some schools even forbidden the signing language. So, well, under this situations, is most of the deaf students, they don't learn the Taiwan Sign Language in the school. Even when they just enrolled in the deaf school, they don't learn any sign language, because in the deaf school the language policy is mainly in the Mandarin. And with some deaf schools, they allow you to use the sign Chinese and the TSL at the same time. So they cannot learn the Taiwan Sign Languages, perfectly. So I think this is the problem.
Right, there seem to be quite a few issues here, but from that video there, Jean, we saw how this child felt empowered, being able to use and learn through sign language. Is that the general view where you are in the US? And what do you feel needs to be conveyed here to help parents and those decision makers understand the importance of sign language for children in particular?
Well, first of all, those 2 videos were just outstanding. And what they really showed is how isolated deaf children are without sign language. And when they get it, they are empowered. But more than that, as I think it was one of the young girl or the boy mentioned, they were depressed when they didn't have it. There's a lot of mental health issues that come up with children and young adults when they aren't allowed to communicate visually through a sign language. So that really is an important point to make. Now, the low numbers of sign language users are exactly what Feng-huai mentioned, is that even the Ministry of Education is reluctant on allowing it in the deaf schools. And so children don't get it later, and it's a default. When they fail at spoken language, which they do because it's so hard to learn spoken language without full hearing, then they provide the sign language late. They should be providing it early. So a lot of it has to do with attitudes. And that's why this national law is so wonderful, because it's a big first step to change attitudes, not only of the administrators in the public schools, but of the children who are learning the sign, the hearing children that are learning the sign. So the reason why, to answer your question, why it hasn't bloomed, as TSL has not bloomed as it should, it's because it's a very oppressed and repressed language.
I want to pick up a few things on what you said, Jean. You talked about attitudes, and earlier you talked about advocacy of the deaf community, linguistic rights for deaf people. Does that exist here, Fang-huai, in Taiwan, those kinds of linguistic rights and the kind of advocacy within the deaf community, being able to express their needs and have their rights recognized?
Yes, I mean, as my father's generations, I mean, they set up so many deaf clubs. They have so many deaf associations. So they, for example, like protest. They need protest, and they need the interpreter on the TV shows, and they protest for they need the sign language in the National Language Act. So I think this is deaf communities. They just recognize their own language, this is Taiwan Sign Language, because they just found their deaf identity. Yeah.
And I'd like to add to Fang-huai, he's being much too modest. His father, Ku Fang-huai, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, has been a major deaf advocate for the deaf community, and he insisted that the government include TSL in the National Language Act.
And along those lines, Jean, deaf schools are more advanced in the United States in adopting bilingual, bicultural framework that enables students to better integrate into society. And I wonder if you could tell us how that works and how that can be applied here in Taiwan.
Well, it's very complex. Bilingual education in the United States is complex, and it's complex for these reasons. Historically, sign language was always a part of deaf education, and Dr. Steve Nover wrote a dissertation on language planning in the 19th century in deaf education. Sign language was there, but then over the years it was pushed down with the oral movement, A.G. Bell and other activists pushing for spoken language, and now it's slowly coming back in the 60s and 70s. But it came in through what we call simultaneous communication, where they mix the two. Bilingual separates the two. You have two languages. You have spoken language and reading and writing, and then you have the sign language. So bilingual education in the United States, and there's some excellent programs that are implementing this, and they implement it from birth, in the early childhood to the kindergarten to elementary, all the way up through high school, where the two languages are presented. Now, some children soar with spoken language with implants and hearing aids, and some don't. Many fall through the cracks. So that's why you want to give the two languages opportunity, two doors open as early as possible. So every child has the opportunity to become bimodal bilingual or bilingual in a sign language in a written language.
Right. So Fang-huai, how does that compare here in Taiwan, where you receive education that's primarily focuses on silent language or spoken languages exclusively?
Well, in Taiwan, it's totally different compared to the United States, because in the United States, the teacher can design their own curriculums. But in Taiwan, we have to follow the curriculums. So I think this is it's complicated, actually. So I think this is, if we need sign language in the school, and I think we need to develop the correct, curriculums for deaf students, because they using the curriculum will be different than the hearing students. So I think that will help.
That is a very important point, and one I think that we should be constantly reminded of. Now, I want to move this a little bit further away from schools and from learning in schools, and talk about kind of the wider or the bigger public perception. Now, in Taiwan, politics plays a crucial role in society, communicating the nuanced meanings behind politically charged statements can be quite challenging though. So how do sign language interpreters adapt to this, and what is Taiwan doing to make this a more inclusive society?
Our program is completely designed for a deaf audience, and we use sign language. Many people tell me that there's little news related to the deaf community in most TV news. But sign language news broadcasts a lot of news involving deaf people, so they can understand what is happening and how it impacts their rights.
For Mike, the toughest part of the job is translating written Chinese into Taiwan Sign Language. He says the two languages can be very different.
Sometimes the Chinese can be vague. We have to look into what it really means and use sign language to convey that meaning. Also, for example, politicians often use very vague language or political speak. I have to think of how to convey the meaning in a neutral way using sign language.
But he says the rewards are great. He remembers a time when deaf people were often excluded from public life, particularly during elections.
When candidates gave speeches, there were no sign language interpreters next to them. Deaf people weren't able to understand what the candidate was saying. But we need to know, so we brought this up. And the Central Election Commission agreed to have interpreters' frames take up 1/3 of the TV screen.
Fang-huai, let me go to you first on this. Earlier we spoke about the CECC daily updates during the pandemic. How much really did that help in bringing awareness or making people understand the importance of sign language?
Well, because the conferences go live, so that people cannot read the captions. So, well, they will depend on the interpreter. So interpreter will provide that information, especially when during the COVID things. So they also learn some things from that, and they will know how to do and what the government says, so they can prepare for that. I think this is good because that's what we call we provide the language access to the deaf people.
Right, and Jean, in a governmental level, are you seeing information, enough information being disseminated to the public in sign language? It was only in 2021 that the White House started its daily press conference briefings and having a sign language interpreter. Why did it take so long? And is there enough being done?
Yes, and that's a very interesting story. The previous administration, during the COVID times when they would have the daily press briefings, refused to provide an ASL interpreter. And the National Association of the Deaf approached them numerous times and they refused. So they sued them. And they won the lawsuit. And by then the administration had changed to a new administration. Now, with the Biden-Harris administration, not only do they provide ASL interpreters in the COVID briefings, but in all briefings. Now, to return to your question, it was interesting that during the previous administration, all 50 states were providing sign language ASL interpreters for their COVID briefings, but the White House refused. And part of it was because they thought captioning was enough. And as Fang-huai brought up, many deaf people don't depend on written captions. They depend on their sign language. And that's the same case in America, that the English captions aren't enough, that they need to have direct interpretation through an ASL interpreter.
And we mentioned how schools have now added sign language in the language curriculum, where children can choose to learn sign language. Why children should choose sign language?
Yeah, because I think this is good. Because for hearing students, they can learn sign language. They can, we say, some students, hearing students, they told me they can talk about the secret using the sign language. Yes, especially when they, because I go diving a lot. So under the water, we can use the sign language. So, sign language have so many benefits. And so if the students, they learn the sign language, they can use it as a second language and use that, to learn more about deaf culture, deaf literature, deaf things. So I think it's good because we just meet another communities. They are different than us. So I think this is good for the hearing students. They learn Taiwan sign language.
Great. And Jean, what is the takeaway for Taiwan from ASL's journey in the United States?
Let me just say that the takeaway is that ASL has sign language. ASL has been studied in the U.S. to have cognitive thinking skills, social skills, linguistic skills, and reading and writing for deaf kids. And the earlier, the better. Early childhood education needs to be introducing sign language as early as possible to these young children so they can develop their minds for thinking and their language skills and their communication. So that would be the biggest takeaway, that early education is key to. And also to point out that teaching TSL in the schools is teaching TSL as a second language. Most deaf children learn their sign language as their first language, and then they learn their written language as their second.
Right. This says, I've learned so much in this program. And the other thing I learned throughout my research into this and throughout the show was that so much more needs to be looked into when it comes to sign language. There needs to be much more discussion. And we need to do this again. Thank you both so much. Dr. Jean Andrews, professor in the Department of Deaf Studies and Deaf Education at Lamar University in Texas, and from Taipei, Ku Fang-huai, a sign language teacher and founder of Signing Village Workshop. Thank you both so much for your time and for being on the program. Now, the language that surrounds us helps shape the way we see the world. As more awareness grows about sign languages and their importance, we hope the deaf children growing up today will have the words to describe a better world tomorrow. Thank you again to our guests and our viewers at home. It's been great to have your company. Goodbye and stay connected.